Terry, it's Bob Lazzari and Tony D'Angelo here at the CTV Eastern Connecticut studio. Welcome to Monday Night Sports Talk.
Good evening, Terry.
Hey, Bob and Tony. Nice to be with you, and thanks for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. A little background on Terry. Tony's familiar with him. Terry, Waterbury, Connecticut native. Tony started his pro career, actually major league career in 1973, lasted through 1999, well, to 1999. He has officiated 4 World Series, 7 NLCSs, 3 All-Star games. Again, he's been involved with 5 no-hitters, was behind the plate for a couple of them.
Wow.
Umpired in the Midwest League, Northern League, Texas League, International League. I can keep going. He did his time in the trenches, and a total of 3,743 regular season games, Tony. It gets you tired just thinking about it.
Now, this is exclusive of the minor leagues?
That was exclusive. That was just
holy cow.
But we can go on and on. And those 3 All-Star games, I thought it was interesting that he umpired 3 All-Star games in 3 different decades. That was pretty cool to me. But Terry, it's a pleasure. And I had met Terry a few weeks ago down at our friends, the Silver Sluggers meeting down at the Derby Library down there, Terry. And just first of all, your impressions of that very close-knit weekly baseball discussion group. It seemed like you enjoyed your time down there that day.
What a great concept. You know, I first heard about it through our newspaper in Waterbury, through Joe Palladino, our fine sports writer for the Republican American. Mm-hmm. And it really grabbed my attention. And when I ran across Rich Marazzi, who's sort of like the informal head of the group, mm-hmm. At a luncheon in West Haven for the Twilight League, he asked me if I would like to come by, and I said, of course. And it's really a great group, and it was nice to meet you, Bob, and seeing some other people in the audience who I had known, and they really know their baseball, I will say that. And they really not work you out, but they put you through some sort of a mind tester to keep your mind sharp on the game and everything else. They're really up in their baseball.
Yeah, and speaking of Rich Marazzi, I'll be co-hosting with him this coming weekend on ESPN Radio, and Tony will be a guest. We'll be talking to Ian O'Connor, who just wrote a book about Derek Jeter. So that ought to be a lot of fun. But Terry, you talked at Silver Sluggers about your time in the minor leagues. Now, spent about a dozen years down there. It's a very rough existence, as we know, Tony. Just maybe you could tell our viewers what really made you persevere so much. I'd assume you had to have a tremendous support network back in that day.
Well, yeah, first of all, I was a high school dropout. I had nowhere to go. I worked in a factory in Waterbury. Waterbury back then was considered a mill town. Mm-hmm. And I was not a great student in school, dropped out, and I just loved the game of baseball. We were always on the field, morning, noon, and night. And somebody always had an umpire, it seemed, and it was we'd go down, we'd play 6 or 7 on the side, but somebody would have to go behind the pitcher to call balls and strikes, to have an idea, just to keep the game in semblance. And they had they named the league after Jimmy Pearsall at Fulton Park. Yeah. And I was 14 years of age, and I was ineligible to play for whatever reason. And I remember standing off to the side, watching the game, and the director of the league, Francis Doc McInerney, he says, "You in the red hat over here, come over. Would you like to help us out and umpire?" I said, "Fine." So I umpired on the bases that day with another umpire who called balls and strikes from behind the mound. Then I became the regular umpire for the league. Didn't get paid for it, but I just liked what I was doing. And I was younger than the players. The players were like 15 and 16, and I was 14 years of age. And took a liking to it, and eventually worked in the grammar school leagues, parochial leagues, and finally admitted to the Umpire School, Al Summers Umpire School in Daytona Beach, Florida in 1960. Went to the school. Fortunately enough, got a job with some help through my late stepfather, Augie Guglielmo, who was an umpire in the National League in 1952. He was an instructor at the school years ago, and he knew the director and the owner of the school. And he called up, midway through the course, and he says, "How's the young kid doing?" He says, "He's doing pretty good." He says, "Well, you're going to give him a job?" "Give him a job?" He said, if I give him a job with that baby face, he'll get killed if he goes in the minor league. Well, he did give me a job, and fortunately enough, things progressed from there. It was, 13 years in the minor leagues is a long time, but Bruce Fremming worked 13 years, Dutch Rennert worked 16 years, and a lot of the umpires who were well established when they got to the big leagues put in a long tenure in the minor leagues, which is very, very difficult. The pay is minuscule. You want to see you do it for the love of the game, but you still have to pay your bills. And things worked out fairly well. I am very blessed to be where I am today and live the lifestyle that I do.
And Terry tells us, Tony, that he had made $1.50 back in those days umpiring, and they used to actually hand over the money at home plate.
They would, exactly. The coaches would pay you at home plate. It would look like a payoff, but that's
they did that when I ushered in the movies, Terry. It's not nearly as glamorous, but
yeah, that's something.
True.
But, again, folks, on the phone with us, former National League umpire Terry Tata, Connecticut's own Terry Tata. Tony, question for Terry.
And Terry, you bring up first of all, good evening, and we're honored. But you bring up a very interesting thing about going to umpire school, being someone who didn't complete high school. And my understanding of umpire schools is not only the on the field, but there's a lot of rules and literary and interpretations and situations. And how did you cope with that? And to people that think being an umpire is easy, why don't you tell them what it's really like?
Yeah, big time. We did have night sessions going over rules, and he had to be totally, literate as far as what was going on with the rules. But, if you adapted to the game on the field, the rules came into place. For instance, we had students who would score 100 on rules, but on the field they were just totally lost. Mm-hmm. So you had to have on-the-field savvy, and that came into place so much. But the game itself more or less dictates how are you going to approach and how are you going to succeed in the game itself. And what kind of an umpire are you going to be? You have to handle people, situations, arguments, stuff like that. Now, they can just teach you that so much, but you've got to have that inner strength to display that awareness on the field to handle players, because you're handling like 50 players. Yeah. You've got 25 players in each team plus the coaches. And the one thing Major League Baseball is always concerned about is crowd control. And you want to try to keep the crowd out of the game as far as the intensity of the activity on the field. You want to get the fans involved, but you don't want to get them to a fever pitch where they can lose control. And they're definitely concerned about that.
Yeah, that's for sure. And there's a lot more to it than just ball strikes and.
Absolutely.
You said there's a lot to umpiring, and again, vice versa too, Tony. The people that can't get the book stuff done and they're pretty good out in the field, right? You need to have both.
You need to have both.
And it's a very competitive business. And again, when I look at your career, Terry, from '73 to now, I think of those teams. We used to, Tony, you and I obviously watched a lot of National League ball. Grew up watching
game
the
of
Mets
the week,
in the '70s, basically. And I think of those summers back in the '70s when Terry was getting started. I think of the veteran stadiums. I think of the riverfront stadiums, the cookie cutter type places.
Terry, I guess you appreciate a shower wherever you go, huh?
But really, my favorite part, Wrigley Field. I mean, you just can't. That today still stands out in my mind. I have a little replica in my gallery downstairs of Wrigley Field. It's a little figurine of about 5 to 7 inches, and it's got the foul poles, and that play. I don't know if you've ever been there. If you ever get a chance and you're in Chicago, definitely go. You've got to go during the summer when the ivy is in full bloom. There's nothing like it.
Yeah, it's something out of like we say, a movie. But again, those places in the '70s, Tony, the even Three Rivers,
well, that's right.
Bush Memorial, but they all had the turf, and this is why I think I used to watch the telecasts, and I'd see people like Terry out there. Now you could actually, in the summer, you could actually see the waves of heat coming off the carpet.
And these guys are fully dressed.
Yes, and I just wanted to ask you, Terry, how bad did it actually get at times? And did you personally, did you ever have a major problem with heat exposure at a Major League game?
It was awful. It was really tough. The river towns especially. Yeah. Cincinnati, St. Louis, those towns, even Pittsburgh, they all had artificial surface. And Philadelphia, Montreal, and Houston, San Francisco had it for a time. The surfaces back then were terrible. It was just like putting a rug on top of concrete.
Yes.
Today they're so much better. Whatever stadiums are used primarily in football, but back then it was just your back and your shoulder blades, they were just ache. And the heat. I remember my last year, we had a series in Cincinnati, July 4th weekend. We played the 3rd and 4th of July, 4th and 5th of July rather, during the day. It was like and I'm not exaggerating, 150 degrees in the field.
Mm-hmm.
And they came into our dressing room before the game and pumped us up with saline, some sort of a liquid, and they gave it to us IV.
Wow.
And fortunately enough for Cincinnati, in the old ballpark, you can go back underneath the stands, and there was an overhang. And I was able to sit down between innings. There was a nurse there with ammonia water. Think of it as once you start taking ammonia water, you're like addicted to it, and you have to continue to take it. So as long as you can stay away from for the first 3, 4, 5 innings, but once you start taking the ammonia water, you have to take it every half inning. And I'll tell you what, those were not pleasant times. My wife was very concerned because I was in my late 50s at the time, and working under those conditions, it's very, very stressful.
That's for sure. And
wow, in a
again,
big league game.
I still remember to this day, and the announcers would say it's brutally hot, and you could see the waves, and they said, my goodness, those umpires. And how they had to dress, and especially the home plate umpire, Tony, with the padding.
With full padding.
But again, you're watching MNST for May 23rd. Just more about Terry's background, Tony. The World Series he did were 1979, 87, 91, and 96. Of course, 96 was in New York. And I also did some research finding out that Terry did 26 postseason games umping the foul lines, which that was kind of interesting. And Tony, you said an interesting thing this morning.
It's kind of like being, Terry, I kind of envision you sort of being like a lighthouse keeper in the desert. It's like when something happens, it's going to be really big, but it's like, must be like hours of boredom or something.
No, foul lines, home plate, first base. Go ask Rich Garcia how it is to work the foul lines. The play he had in Yankee Stadium with Jeffrey Mayer and Tony Tarasco. So it's very, very difficult. These games are all under the microscope. Everybody's watching. The whole world is watching.
Yes.
And if you screw up, boy, you're labeled for life. Ask Larry Barnett what happened in Boston.
Oh, yeah.
And by the way, he had to play right, and they let him hang. Yeah. Unfortunately, they just let him hang with the Ed Armbruster, Carlton Fisk collision at home plate.
Watched it time and time again.
So when you work these events, they are so greatly magnified that you already are under the scope, and you come under so much scrutiny. And Don Denkinger, 1985 in Kansas City. I mean, he received death threats after the thing was over. Come on, I mean, it's just it's just so you have to be lucky. You have to get the plays right, and I've always said, just try not to. You don't want to miss anything, but boy, don't miss one in a crucial situation.
Yeah, and Terry knows that personally, Tony. He made a call in the 91 World Series, Atlanta, Minnesota, where Lemke slid under Brian Harper, and people had thought that it was a boom-boom play, and they thought he was out, but the replay showed that the contact was elbow, not the ball, and Terry said he spent the winter kind of hanging his hat on that, so it does. It can stay with you, but and also again we mentioned that Terry was the home plate umpire, Tony, for 2 no-hitters, Negro in '73, Seaver, and about the one in '73. It's ironic that was your first year, Terry, and here you go, your first year in the bigs. Maybe you could share memories if you have any of that day, because it's so long ago.
That must be awful pressure, Terry.
How hard it is to umpire when a knuckleballer is pitching, and the approach that differently than you would a normal. It must be tough to, especially a guy that's got a knuckleball that was working like Negro. What do you remember about that?
Well, actually, knuckleball pitchers I think are easy to work because you can wait on the pitch. I mean, the pitch is coming in, and you have to judge where it passed through the strike zone,
right.
Not where the catcher catches it. Because I've had Bruce Benedict, who was the catcher back in those days for Atlanta. Yeah. He would go like to one knee on the outside and catch the ball, but if the ball would pass through the strike zone. So you could actually wait on a knuckleball, but you got a guy like Nolan Ryan or somebody that brings it up there anywhere between 95 and 100 miles an hour. You got to make it quick. You just don't have any time to to reflect and take a second look. Well, with a knuckleball pitcher, you could wait. And on that particular day, Atlanta had won the game handily, and it was just the idea of getting the no-hitter. And he had a formidable lineup going through San Diego. He had Nate Colbert and Clarence Gaston and some other players. And I remember after the game was over, I got into the clubhouse and they doused me with beer. That was supposed to be a rookie's initiation for working a no-hitter. Bruce Fleming and Paul Pryor and Ed Vargo doused me with beer. But and the other one was Tom Seaver in Cincinnati when he joined the Reds, and he ended up shutting out and no-hitting St. Louis. And George Hendrick was the last out on a ground ball to Dan Dreesen at first base unassisted. But so listen, everybody's involved. The first base umpire has a big role in this because you could have a bang play at first base, and if the play is close and you call the runner safe, the no-hitter is gone. Ask Jim Joyce what happened in Detroit this past year, and that's all in a nutshell. So everybody's involved, whether you're at home plate, first base, or whatever.
Again, we're on the phone with former NL umpire Terrry Tata, and I'm looking at some of the names that he worked with over the years, Tony. He mentioned Vargo was terrific, and Doug Harvey. Now, Doug Harvey was a National League umpire, Hall of Famer. Now, ex-players and managers, Terry, will still say that Harvey was the best quote-unquote balls and strikes guy they ever came across. Now, basically, what made him so good? If you had to explain to somebody, Doug Harvey.
Well, he was, his reputation, obviously, but you have to build that up, and you have to earn the reputation and the respect. And Doug did it over a number of years. He was very, very confident. He went back there, and you could tell he was in total control. But there were a lot of umpires who were very good.
Sure.
Now, understand, Doug Harvey is only the fourth National League umpire to make the Hall of Fame. Only the fourth one. There's only 9 umpires in the Hall of Fame, and their election process comes up every 4 years. But Doug was an outstanding umpire. I had the privilege of working with him in 3 league championship series. Worked the whole year with him in 1976, and he totally was the epitome of a major league umpire, along with Al Barlick, Bill Clem, and Jock O'Connell, who are the other 3 umpires in the Hall of Fame.
Pretty good company, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you had mentioned, I think at Silver Sluggers, Terry had told us that back in the day when it came down to crunch time, Bowie Kuhn would say, Vargo and Harvey, I want guys like that. I don't care how you do it, but have those guys doing the games. Is that true, Terry?
Well, what happened was it was actually Chub Feeney.
Chub Feeney,
Chub Feeney was the president of the National League, and I was involved with 2 league championship series, and at the time there were best of 5s, and I believe it was 1976. The Reds were playing the Phillies, and Chub would go over to Doug and Ed Vargo and say, look, I want you guys to work it out. I don't care which one of you works game 4 or 5, but work it out amongst yourself. And as it turned out, Vargo worked game. Doug worked game. Doug would have had game 5 in that series. Then in 1980, when the and I think was probably one of the greatest league championship series ever in a game 5, best of 5.
That was a great series.
Houston and Philadelphia, the last 4 games went extra innings. Vargo had to play in game 5, and again, Doug ended up working first base. So he had confidence in both fellas, both umpires. They were very well respected, Vargo as well as Doug, and he's just working on amongst yourself. I have no problem with either one of you.
Yeah, excellent. They were terrific. Tony, question?
And Terry, this is really the probably the umpiring, when did you stop beating your wife question. Leo Durocher said that good hitters get a 4th strike. How do you feel about that?
You know what? That's the announcers.
Yep.
That's the announcers coming in. When the announcers have dead time, they bring this stuff up. Even Joe Garagiola, who became a great ally of the umpires, by the way.
Yes.
He would say, well, you know what? He's a superstar, so he gets that pitch.
Yeah, I watched him for years.
What if you have Barry Bonds hitting and Greg Maddux pitching? I mean, who do you give it to in that situation? Really. So, no, listen, I mean, I've called strikes. I remember Dale Murphy. Dale Murphy I called him on strikes twice, and he never complained. And he turned around, and he wanted to say something. The next day, he gets to third base, and I'm working in third base, and he comes over, and he says, Terry, I'm sorry. I said, you don't have to apologize, Dale. That was yesterday. Today's a new day, and we start over. Yeah. So, the players, that's often been said. I totally disagree. Bonds gets called on strikes. The Maddox, everybody has to earn their strikes. A-Rod gets rung up. I mean, you see these guys get rung up. Come on. Yeah. That's just idle airtime that they have to fill, I think.
Yeah, and Terry at Silver Sluggers, Tony had mentioned guys like Manny Sanguian, the famous bad ball.
Yeah, who gave you a good beef, Terry, behind the plate?
Yeah.
Oh, behind as far as catchers?
Yeah.
But they can't, because if they bitch and moan, you just get rid of them. They're not going to argue with you. I mean, you're there to umpire. I mean, picture yourself at a desk in an office, and somebody starts yelling at you. How are you going to be able to concentrate on your work? So you just tell them, look, knock it off. If you want to see the rest of the game, keep your mouth shut. Otherwise, I could hear that water running in the clubhouse now, and you're out of here.
Yeah, but, especially if they turned around, they were gone. Right?
No, you cannot turn around. No. You just Bob Boone, I'll never forget. We're in Philadelphia. Steve Carlton's pitching, and Carlton was so zoned in. He would just get the ball and throw it.
Yeah.
The first pitch of the game, it was almost like right down the middle, and I call a ball, and Boone throws the ball back to Carlton, and after the second pitch, he just says to me, he leans back. He doesn't turn around. He says, Terry, what was wrong with that first pitch? I said, I didn't like it. He said, okay, all right, let's go.
That's
and then we just went on from there. But it's just, you just don't turn around. Listen, they have their ground, we have our ground, and you try to respect one another, and you move along and try to just keep the game at a sane pace.
Yeah, that's for sure. Again, we have just a couple minutes left with Terry Tata, the great umpire from the state of Connecticut, 73 to 99 he worked. And I think of those years in the 70s, Terry, and I think of a person that you probably had in front of you a few times, Johnny Bench, how great a player he was, Tony, how great a defensive catcher. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about what it was like being behind him, and was he as good as advertised?
Oh, he certainly was. He was a total package. I mean, I even had him in AAA. He caught at Buffalo in 1967.
Wow.
They had a very veteran team there, and then he went up to the Reds the following year. And, come on. You know what? He was a type of you see these catchers today. They move inside, they move outside. You never saw Bench moving inside or outside.
No, none of those guys. Not
at all. He
just
moved the glove around. And, he was, come on, he's Hall of Famer. And enough said, he's earned his... whatever awards he has been, attributed to him.
Yeah, that's he was probably one of my favorites, top 5 players I saw or liked back then. Tony,
my favorite guy, and I don't have favorites, but the guy I like a top 5, and I don't like to categorize, but I will. Number 1 was Willie Startler. Unfortunately he's no longer with us. We lost Willie in 2001. You talk about a guy that just. No peaks or valleys. He was a leader in the clubhouse, and just a terrific human being. Tony Perez, you couldn't ask. He would come up. And he would come up from like on the on-deck circle and come around you, and he'd whisper in your ear, and he'd give you some expletive like you blankety blank, right? And now you got to call balls and strikes on this guy. But just a terrific. And by the way, his son. Doesn't his son do a great job on ESPN? Just a chip off the old block, just like the father. Just like the father. And Dale Murphy, Tommy John, who's managed it down at the Bridgeport Bluefish, Bill Russell, who you probably, don't hear. Dodgers. He was a shortstop with the Dodgers. Those were terrific people. I mean, Bill Verdon, Danny Ozark. Guys, just names that they're not up there in the upper echelon, but terrific, terrific people. And across the lot during the game, and they've all had a lasting imprint. And
I'll let you ask your last question, Tony, but I know down at Silver Sluggers, I just want to mention this, Terry, somebody had asked him, maybe your favorite memory, and obviously his mind went right to the World Series. And in '96, Terry said, here I am at New York, I'm toward the end of my umpiring career, and here I am, back almost where it all started, here on the East Coast, and you're looking at this expansive stadium, and that kind of, I was actually almost tearing up listening to you talk about it at the Silver Sluggers. It seemed like you had so much pride that you were there, and it all came full circle when you did the '96 World Series, I think, Terry.
Well, growing up in the north end section of Waterbury, a highly predominant Italian, a lot of Yankee fans, and everything was Yankee, Yankee, Yankee. So, this is the early '50s. I used to play, throw the ball up against the wall in my backyard. I had a cutout, like it was just like an infield on the backyard. That's just the way the grass and the cement was cut for the walkway. And I would, you would imitate crowd noise. The ball would go up in the air and like up into the second upstairs in the second family dwelling of our home, and it was like the upper deck of the stadium. And we would relive things like that. And now, just reliving Yankee Stadium, and now here I am in the World Series, umpteen years later,
wow.
And the Yankees are getting beat 4-0. Paul O'Neill is the last hitter, and I says, after this game is over, I'm just going to stand here and just reflect, go back to my childhood a little bit.
Yeah.
And Mark Wohlers strikes out O'Neill. He looked like Zorro the way he swung the bat. He was, like we had the sword.
Yeah.
Strikes him out to end the game, and I'm just standing there. He turns around to me and he says, "Terry, you had a big zone tonight." And I says, "Please leave me alone. I'm just trying to gather my thoughts as a teenager growing up back in Waterbury, for crying out loud."
Wow, let me have my time.
It was a great
There's
story.
no peace for an umpire. It's amazing.
Yeah, it really was, yes.
That's a great story. Tony, final question?
And Terry, maybe just one question as far as, if you could get one call that you made that you wish you could do over again, what would it be?
Let's see. I had one play back in the middle 80s. Phillies playing the Mets. Torrey was the manager. Joe Pignatano was one of the coaches. Tying run on third base. And Steve Carlton was pitching for the Phillies. He was pitched into the ninth inning back then. Back then you pitched into the ninth inning. You didn't
we talk
bring
about
your
that here
closer
all the
in,
time.
right? So fly ball to center field, medium center field. Gary Maddox gets the ball, fires a strike in, and the runner is out. I mean, he's out for almost like by 10 feet. And he bowls over Bob Boone, the catcher, and they roll. Now, he's the tying run, and instead of waiting to see Boone come up with the ball and show me that he has the ball in his grasp, in his hand, or in the glove, I call him out before I could see that. And in the meantime, the ball is smothered underneath Boone, and it's on the ground. And then Boone finally comes up with it. Now, I couldn't see it from my vantage point. The Mets charged me out of the dugout. Now the game is over. I'm walking up the field. Well, they had like a barricade. I couldn't get off the field. Pignatano and Torrey are screaming and yelling and this and that. And I guess Warner Wolf did a job on me the next day on his "let's go to the videotape."
Oh, yeah.
And I remember I had to get a flight the next morning out to San Francisco. Chub Feeney was the president of the National League, and he says, "I heard what happened in New York last night." He says, "Terry, you know what?" He wasn't second guessing me. He says, "But we can't ask on that play." Now, after the game was over, I did ask Jerry Crawford at first base if he could see, and he says it looked like there was some jostling of the ball underneath. So if I had gone to Jerry, but my error there was I did not wait. You have to wait, and have them show you the ball. And if he doesn't show you the ball, then he dislodged it, and the runner would have been safe, and we would have been playing extra innings. Now Torrey gave me a shot. He says Tata doesn't like to work extra innings in September. It was a late game, it was late in the season, but nonetheless, if I had to take one call back, probably that would have been it.
That's not bad. Again,
that's a wonderful story, though. It's a life lesson.
27 summers, over 40 years in professional baseball. And Terry, it's been a pleasure having you on. Terry. And I'll give our regards to Rich Marazzi and all the Silver Sluggers. I'll be back down there in a few weeks, hopefully, and I'll be there each week in the summer. But again, it was great meeting you here, and great talking to you tonight, and thank you for your cooperation.
Thank you so much, Terry.
You're welcome, Bob and Tony. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's been our pleasure, and we'll keep in touch, and best wishes to you, your wife, Janice, and your family. Take care.
Thank you very much.
God bless,
All right,
Terry.
take care.
Good night.